Thank you. All right, so our minutes were approved, and you all know about the recordings and materials. So you'll find the past handouts are there in the members only section of the website as well. All right, so just a reminder, or actually just a clarification, some of you may or may not be getting my emails that get sent out. And if you're not, it means they're probably going to spam or promotions. I'm hearing from a couple people that it tends to go into the spam or promotions or bulk mail box. So try to check that from time to time. I think I found a way to rectify that. So from now on, hopefully it'll go to your regular inbox. The Mainline Muse is our blog, and don't forget that you can contribute to this blog at any time. It's really great for presenting for each of us for ideas or thoughts. You can stir a conversation by putting your comments in there. And the latest one is one that I wrote called The Bright Side. So I was like last week, I was sitting looking at my email and I found it was a really great thing that came up in my email. And I thought to myself, I'm the president of the Mainline Music Teachers Association. At least I should be sharing things that I find out. So I wrote that blog in attempts to um, share a couple things, but at the same time, I'm hoping that we can get some comments for other people to share their things as well. So if you go there, you'll see a couple things. And it was actually rather fun to write that blog. So I think it's a really quick, fun, easy read. So please take a look at that. Anyone can look at that. You don't have to be a member to look at that blog. You don't have to be a member to contribute your comments to that blog either. Okay, and then we have our piano festival. Just a reminder that if you are participating in the Connie Murray Piano Festival, today is the deadline to get those videos and scores uploaded using that link that you received in the email a couple weeks ago. Does anyone have any questions about the Connie Murray?
Yeah, I do. So I have a situation where a first-time student is recording, and I got some recordings we were happy with, but then I realized he had the music out in front of him. And this is actually a student that doesn't read music, and he's not looking at the music at all. But I did consult with Sue and decided to ask him to record again. But I haven't heard back, and I'm afraid it's not going well. So I thought I'd ask, if in this case, if you've got somebody that's really not looking at the music, is it okay to go ahead and submit what we have?
I suppose if absolutely necessary, but I just wanted to say, what's the age of your student? Is he a high school student?
No, he's 9.
Unfortunately, okay.
I would say that, like, perhaps they can be submitted for, evaluation anyway. I just don't think that they'll get a superior. I think, like, not having it recorded will only prevent the superior, but the feedback may be valuable anyway.
Right. Yeah. And it's recorded. It's recorded. It's a, decent recording. Okay. So, all right. So we should definitely try to go with one where the music's not on the music stand, regardless of whether he's looking at it or not.
Well,
okay.
Well, he's aware of the deadline today, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You still have time today to call them, bother them a bit.
I've brought it to their attention, and they said they'd record this morning, but it hasn't come. So
the morning's still young. I just find my students, it takes many, many takes, and I tell them not to get frustrated. I tell them to try to get all the way to the end of the piece, and then just take their best video. If they keep stopping at every little mistake, then they're never going to get all the way through the piece.
Yeah. It really it's different taping it. Usually we just prepare them the best we can. We send them in there all by themselves. And we're not called to make a judgment on which tape. And I found that to be it brings out that last little bit of perfectionism that's in me. That it's really much harder to decide on the tape because I feel like I want them all to be perfect, but that's not. I don't think that's what we're going for here.
Yeah, it's all a nice big learning experience. I tend to like the students to make sure they show me the videos first. I don't actually have any of my students do the submissions because I want to see the videos before they get submitted. I do have a question for if anyone knows. I was uploading videos yesterday to YouTube and I reached a limit. Like suddenly I couldn't upload anymore. It says check back in 24 hours because you reached your daily limit. And I've never heard of that before.
I had that problem. I had that problem, Miriam, when I went to mount a holiday recital, and that's why I went away from FaceTime, because they only allowed you so much, and then you had to wait this horrendous long time. But I was told by people who use FaceTime all the time that that's normal. That's not an untoward thing.
Jonathan, what'd you say?
There is a limit.
I encountered this problem with the Sutton Festival, which is one of the reasons why I had. It's weird. It's inconsistently enforced. Sometimes you can get around it. I figured out that, like when I do my virtual recitals, if I put them all in one video, it doesn't exceed my limit. But if I upload each of the students' performances as a video, it immediately cuts me off. I did a little research. I asked a few people who knew about these things, and the limits are not really enforced consistently. But if you submit a lot of if you submitted 14 videos that were 2 minutes each, you'd probably get stopped. But if you submitted 1/2 hour video, you probably won't get stopped. So anyway.
Well, now I know. I mean, here I am submitting them last minute. So I may have to end up just giving Google Drive links if I can't get enough videos up on YouTube.
That's an option. Alternatively, you could have them upload to YouTube ahead of time and just send you the YouTube link because it doesn't cost anything for them to upload it themselves.
Well, that is true. That's a good idea too. Yeah.
That's what I advise people to do.
Well, that's really surprising because I actually uploaded all of my 30 plus students. I can't remember how many students that are doing it, and I uploaded it myself. And thank God I didn't have that problem.
We're lucky.
Yeah, but I did it in different batches as my time permitted. But I've never had that, and hope I never do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw those emails coming in.
But I encountered the problem when I tried to do my first time I did a studio class months ago. I tried to do it as a YouTube playlist, and the wall I hit in is that I couldn't upload all the videos individually. So I ended up, what did I end up doing? I ended up putting them all in a video editor, making one video, and sharing it over Zoom.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions about the Connie Murray Festival? All right, good. I'm really excited that we have 179 students who have entered, in spite of the fact that it's a very different situation this year. Being virtual, I thought that wasn't half bad. I think we're usually over 200 in the past few years. So 179 is approaching that, and I'm rather pleased that enough people have participated, so that's good. Now, a call for presentation proposals. Jonathan, do you might want to say just a really quick word about the presentation proposals?
So up on the website, we have 2 Google Forms. One is for 5 minutes presentation, and one is for full-length presentations. If you are interested in doing either a full-length presentation or a 5 minutes presentation, please go to is it the members only section of the website, Felicia? I can't remember.
No, it's under events. It's under the events tab.
Okay.
You don't even have to be a member to click on that and present your proposal.
The other thing is that I had a little trouble reaching people. Jane, I spelled your email wrong, and you probably didn't get my email. I hope the members of the program committee got my email. I apologize that it was late. This was kind of a difficult week for me because I was caring for 2 family members in the hospital. But I'd like to meet with the program committee for a few minutes after this meeting. And if anyone has suggestions about programs for next year or presenters, please just email me. But in the meantime, if you want to submit something, please go to the events section and fill out the brief Google survey. It'll ask you for 5 minutes to give a brief summary of what you plan to present. For the full-length presentation, you're asked for a little bit more. But you have to have a topic, you have to know what you're talking about and be able to tell us what you're going to do. We prefer to have most of our full-length talks by outside presenters, but we always like to have a few members do one. So, and 5 minutes are supposed to be for members. So please start submitting. The process is underway.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, so volunteers are still needed for our next season. We need a student recital chairperson, and if I did send out a link to that job description on the last mainline memo that I had sent out just maybe a week ago. And what I really need to do is get it up on the website so we could just all go there and click on these. But we have a job description for the student recital chairperson. Their student recital is twice a year. And we would just need someone to secure the facility to make sure that the insurance is up to date. And then we would also need that person to host that recital and to facilitate the list that we need for video permissions. And it's really not a whole lot of work. And if you can always talk to John Klein, our current recital chairperson, if you want to know more. Also, program chairperson, Jonathan, if you want to just say a quick word about what the program chair does.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed doing this job for the past 3 or 4 years. The job of this position is to secure our lineup of presentations for the year. So you have a responsibility that falls right at the center of why we have meetings. You have a committee of people that you rely on to help you find and contact presenters. I have already posted the presenter applications for next year, so that's done. I would like someone to help me during this spring in contacting and finalizing the program. So I will help with that, so you're not all alone. And you correspond with the presenters to make sure they have what they need. You correspond normally with Jacobs so that we have a venue. I still don't yet know exactly how that's going to work next year. I don't have an answer for you. I will provide a detailed written description shortly, but in the meantime, if anyone would like to do this important job, please contact me, and I would co-chair with you for the next few months to make sure that the first year programs are set up, and so that'll be good, and so just contact me.
Thank you, Jonathan, for saying all that. We also need a new treasurer starting at their May board meeting. So not necessarily do you have to be good with the numbers, but you have to feel a little bit organized and not mind learning how to operate perhaps an Excel program. Our current treasurer, Bethany, would work with you and in that transition process. She would work with you for this May board meeting that's coming up. She would meet with you and go over how she does this job. My guess is, she couldn't be here today to explain it, but my guess is it's not that time consuming. You would just have to be able to be at 2 board meetings a year and just, send a check from now and then to the presenters. I know you have to send a check to the masterclass clinicians as well. So it's really about sending checks, keeping track of the money, and giving a couple reports a year. Yeah, I don't think it's extremely involved, but it is a high-end responsibility at the same time. So please contact Bethany if you are interested, Bethany Schneider. Program committee, if you would like to be part of the program committee, I think Jonathan mentioned this already, please stay after today, after this presentation, and you can offer your voice or your thoughts, or just want to maybe see what the program committee is all about. All you have to do is stay a little bit longer and see what the program committee does and see if you want to be in it next year. All right, and next I want to mention about the student recital. It's going to be April 18th. It has to be virtual again. John Klein already checked with the church and they are still not allowing events in the church, and I think it's just as well. It's still a bit early in the game here, so we will have it virtual, and there will be an email coming out about that shortly. Our masterclass on April 6th is also going to be virtual. This is the one that we have with Westchester University. Westchester University has acquired Alan Chow from Eastman School of Music, and we are going to be submitting 3 of our students, and Westchester University submits 3 of their students. So I have a Google form all ready to go, and you are going to be just, if you would like to submit your students for consideration, then Alan Chow will pick from the students that we submit. All right, so, and thanks to Igor Reznansky, he's not a member of Mainline, but he is the person who is going to be hosting this event, and all these submissions are going to be going to him, and then he will be relaying information with Alan Chow. Yes, Susan?
Will that be virtual or on site?
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that it's virtual because Westchester University is closed to outside events. So it will be virtual, and Igor will be hosting it on Zoom. So, and if you want to submit more than one student, you can, because it's up to Alan Chow to say, I would like this piece in my master class, or I would like that piece, or this level student, or that level student. So feel free to submit as many students as you want to submit, and you will only one of them, or well, it depends on what he wants. But 3 from Mainline is the limit. So.
Can I ask? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I apologize.
okay,
I apologize if you've already said. What levels are you looking for students at?
Well, I made the Google form so that it would be late elementary and up, and I realized that sounds ridiculous, you know, Alan Chow, Eastman School of Music, but at the same time, I'm under the impression that Mainline has always provided this master class for really any level student. That's my understanding. That's what I've heard, even though it doesn't feel that way. So, you know, you can try to submit a late elementary student and see if he wants to address that piece.
Okay. Thank you.
And let me see. Before we get to primetime players, I just want to mention a couple things. PMTA, our state organization, is looking for nominations for Teacher of the Year Award and Distinguished Service Award. So if you know of any teacher or person in MLMTA who has been heavily involved, or perhaps a really great teacher in your mind, and you'd like to nominate, let me just quick read off what it is. If you want to nominate a Teacher of the Year, this is what they're looking for. It says, the PMTA Teacher of the Year Award is presented annually to a member of PMTA in recognition of excellence in teaching, musicianship, and professional activity. The award is presented at the conference banquet, will include a plaque and recognition in the PMTA newsletter and on the PMT website. All right, and these are due March 31st. So, okay, the other one is the Distinguished Service of the Year Award. So the PMTA Distinguished Service Award is presented annually to a member of PMTA in recognition of service to PMTA at the state or local level that has been significant and long-term. Again, the award will be presented at the conference banquet. And just so you are all aware, the person receiving the award must be at the banquet. So again, these are due March 31st. So if you have someone in mind, just get in touch with me, okay? And then we'll talk about where to go from there. The next thing, I'm going to be sending it out. By the way, I want to mention, I'll send out an email about that masterclass with Alan Chow. I'm going to have deadlines in there. I think the first deadline is please register by March 20th. I didn't have that on the agenda, so that's why I wanted to mention that out loud. Two, I just have a question for everyone. You can offer your thought or opinion now if it's up to you. But this year we had 2 master classes, one hosted by Mainline and one is going to be by Westchester University. The joint session with Westchester University is great because, and I want to keep that going every year because we can have very highly acclaimed clinicians coming and share the cost with Westchester. For our Mainline events, we were able to cut the cost a little by having it virtual. And that's not why we had it virtual, but we were able to cut down on the cost because it was virtual. And as you know, we had Brian Gans. It was very effective. It was really a wonderful masterclass. It was, we had a lot of young students in there, very small students, I would say late elementary and beyond. And it really was quite great. I liked it. But what I want to know from you is, do you want to do 2 master classes like that every year? Or should we do it every other year? For instance, next year, our master class with Westchester University is on us, where we have to find the person to come and be the clinician for that. So perhaps if we did it every other year, the year that we don't have to find the clinician, maybe we could do 2 master classes, or we could do it every year. Anyone have any thoughts on that? It's okay if there's silence. It's all right. But I wanted to put that out there. Okay, silence.
Well, I guess what you need to know, Miriam, is did everybody else like it? I mean, I know you thought it was great. I unfortunately had something going on. I did watch some of the video posted on the site, and I liked it. Looked good to me. But I guess you need to figure out how many other teachers really enjoyed it. So
I definitely enjoyed it, and I think that my student benefited greatly from the experience.
Time for another Google form.
Yeah, maybe a little survey. Do we want 2 master classes, or every other year have 2 master classes?
Yeah, I think you should do a survey because this is only a small portion of who we are. You
Yep.
need to find out what other people think.
Okay, all right.
This is one question I was going to ask at the program committee meeting today. So yes.
All right. We'll get that survey out so you can all expect one. Thank you. All right. Now we move on to primetime players. So it was another successful one. We had 6 people again, which I think is successful comparatively to our past prime times. And the fact that it was virtual, maybe the fact that it's virtual, it's easier for people to make it to prime time. So Carol, did you want to say a few words about how that went?
I feel that the people who attended benefited from it. We used Duets and Dual Piano Works as our platform, and there is a small list of duets and 2 piano numbers that were mentioned at this that has been put up for members only on the screen. We had a lot of fun. There was a lot of discussion. We never lacked for conversation, and we did a lot. We actually had a second piano part that was offered for one of the sonatinas, and we can play along with that, or you can listen to it, whatever. And every time we meet, we stretch ourselves a little bit wider than the time before, and I feel that the people who participated in it, we all enjoyed it. The time flew. I think we were together for like 2 hours, and it was a very brief 2 hours. The one thing that you might want to put in your thinking hat, that the next Primetime Players is scheduled for April 20th, I believe it is. And that one probably will still be on Zoom. We'll let you know. But it is going to be the planner, as it has been before, for the teachers' recital, which we do intend to still mount for the May meeting. How? We're not quite sure yet. But if you would like to participate by performing, it would be nice to know that you're interested. You can email me your interest in that, but we were going to use the next primetime to discuss that and perhaps pull some things together for the May luncheon. Yes, the virtual platform is nice for primetime, but and we get people to come that have not ever attended before. It still would be nice to be back in person. And that may happen as people get their shots. My husband and I got our first COVID shots. We get our second one the end of March. So we had to go to McGuire Air Force Base to get it, but that's here and there. We still got it. When we feel a little bit better and the parameters open up that more people get the vaccine, we're going to be in a situation where we can plan things to come together with masks but be together in the same area. So things may open up, who knows, between now and May.
And I just want to mention to that, though, the CDC guidelines just came out yesterday that you can if you are all vaccinated, you can actually be together. So maybe we'll have it that those that are vaccinated can come to the May recital in person, and everyone else will be on Zoom. So we would still have Zoom there available. Perhaps we're still thinking this one through, but we would still have Zoom for the teacher's recital, but you can also be there in person, especially if you're vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, then you would have to wear a mask and social distance. So.
But we do have fun, and do think about if you'd like to participate in the teacher's recital, because that information needs to be given to me when we know when we're closer to the event. That's
right. That's right. And I was so pleased to have Susan just played an amazing rendition of an Irish jig on her saxophone at the prime time. It was really awesome. She played along with the recording, and boy, was it great. That was.
Oh, thanks, Mariam.
It was super fast and fun. Wow. I mean, imagine a jig on a saxophone. I never thought of that before, and it was awesome.
Oh, thank
in
you,
honor of March.
I had a wonderful time. It was great fun.
Yep. So you can when you come to these prime times, you can play. You don't have to play at all. You can just watch. You can listen. You can even just have discussions with us. It's also a great time to ask each other questions about our teaching. Or what music is out there for this or for that, or what suggestions for recitals. And it's a really great time. It's a good time to participate with your colleagues. So we have one more, April 20th. Let me see. Finally, I guess that's it. I think we're ready for Jonathan. Yes. Oh, Susan.
Hi, Mary. May I ask an unrelated question? I wanted to run a few little practical questions for the group in the chat. Would that be all right? Just about miscellaneous stuff like software. Can I put it out there?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
In the chat.
Okay, I will.
Are these links you're sharing or just questions?
No, they're not links. I'm just asking for suggestions if anybody has them on
Sure.
certain software and platforms.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Things.
So if you guys want to add to the chat, that would be great.
Okay.
So if we could just mute ourselves while Jonathan has his 5 minutes for a new idea called Creating Virtual Duets Using the Collabra Platform.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody. One of the things that many teachers do, particularly with beginning students, is create opportunities for them to play with the teacher or to play with other students. Playing duets, as we know, teaches students to listen to themselves and to another part. It teaches them to play in a steady tempo. It teaches them to understand how different parts fit within a texture and how they need to be balanced. This was the first challenge that I faced when I had to convert all of my teaching to online. How do I get the students to play with me, particularly in the early stages when we're really trying to develop their rhythmic sense and their listening sense? What I did is I would record accompaniments in my method books and in the repertoire books they were doing, and I would have students play along with them. Now, I use a platform called Collabra, which I have spoken about before. It is a video sharing platform, which you pay for, where you can share videos and lessons with your students, and they can record their practice sessions, and you can comment on them. There are two ways that Collabra actually allows you to create virtual performances. The first one is very easy to use, and it's good enough if you want to do a little assessment to see how a student's doing, but it's not really quite good enough if you want to do it for, say, a repertoire class or a virtual recital. The first way is to just use the feature that's called Practice with Lesson. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to take you into my Collabra account. So hopefully you all see that. So here are some practices submitted by a few of my young students. Here's one. I asked a student to record himself playing with the accompaniment from a piece from the Pattern Pieces 1 by Piano Safari. And you'll hear the sound is good enough, but maybe not good enough for other than evaluation purposes. So there's the accompaniment. So the balance, getting a good balance between the accompaniment and the student, it's fine for me to know that he's keeping a steady tempo, but if I wanted to use this for a repertoire class or a recital, it's not quite good enough. The way the student does this is very easy. I'm going to show you how they do that. So this is very good for just assessment purposes. I can't find my account. Well, basically, let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Sorry for this. I'd have to find my other account. Let me see if it's here. Sorry for the delay here. Just waiting for it to show my, you know what? They might not be here because they reset my account. Basically, the student sees a link for a recording and they hit a button that says Practice with Lesson, and the recording plays and they play along with it. There's another feature you can use that will actually produce a very good quality recording that you could use, say, for a repertoire class, and that function is called Compose. So let me go back to my, so Compose means I take a piece, I provide a bass track, for example, the teacher's part, and I'll provide a metronome count off. So for example, here's one that I just made. This is another piece from Piano Safari. So what I did is I created a guide track, and then I played along, then I sent it to myself, my student account, to play along with it. So let me just do something here. I'm going to just move this back. And you send this link to the student, and they put on headphones, and they play along with it. Now, when you get it, you have to do a little bit of adjusting. I want you to hear that these are going to be slightly out of sync. So you hear the two parts are out of sync. That's very easy to fix. The reason they're out of sync is because there's a little bit of latency. There's a delay in the time that the sound from the guide track reaches the headphones and then the person plays it. That's very easy to fix. You hit this little trim knob, which basically adjusts for the latency. After doing this a number of times, I know that when I do this, I'm about a half second behind. So I just move it forward by 0.55 seconds. And now you will hear that it is pretty close to in time. Now there are other things I can do to make a really nice recording. I can adjust the volume balance. So I can make this a little bit louder and the teacher's part a little softer. The other thing I can do is I can pan them. Panning means what side of the stereo field do you put this in? So if you want to do it from the point of view of the performers, the teacher is playing the bass part, so I might pan this halfway to the left, and then I could pan the student's part halfway to the right. This creates a sense of space and separation so that you can hear the parts clearly. And then you see you can hear the two parts pretty clearly and really get a good idea of how the student is doing. And the sound quality is good enough that you could share it in a repertoire class. So the downsides of this is that it is video only. So if you want to create an actual it's audio only, so it doesn't do video. But the good side about it is when I wanted to make something for a good quality recording for a repertoire class, I would have the students record with their headphones, and then I would put their part into an audio editor with my accompaniment and edit it and put it together. I created some really good recordings, but that takes time and quite a bit of skill. So if you want a quick way to really assess if your student is able to play along with an accompaniment without having to put it into an audio editor, this does it for you. I would recommend that if you use this tool, I have my students always record something during the week so that I can give them feedback in midweek. And I always ask them to record videos because I want to observe their posture and their technique. So when I have students start to use this next month, I'm going to have them use it after I've seen them play along with the accompaniment and I've observed their posture and their technique, and I've also heard them play alone in the lesson. But this is a very good way to make collaborative recordings without too much work on the teacher's end. Another thing you can do with this thing is, let's say students are performing duets with each other. You can give a student the responsibility to create the guide track. So say if you have two students playing a duet, have one of them do some kind of a count off, maybe play a metronome, have the student record his or her part, and then they send their part to the other student who records along with it. You can create multiple parts. You can create a piece with 10 parts if you want. But this just allows you to get the parts, quickly edit them, and make them sound pretty good enough to share with your other students. Collabra does require a subscription. It costs $7 per student for MTNA members. I use this tool very extensively. I have several videos that I made when I demonstrate techniques that are very basic that I want to show with other students. I post it in their account and ask them to watch the demonstrations. I give them accompaniment tracks to play along with. They submit things to me so that I can give them feedback between lessons. I sometimes use this as an overflow device. For example, I have an adult student, very advanced, who sees me every other week for 90 minutes. So things that I'm not going to deal with during the lesson, like I have him record his scales on Collabra and I just comment on them outside the lesson, so we have more time to spend on his repertoire and his musicianship. So the service that this company provides is amazing. They're a small company. Whenever I have help, I call them up. I know the 3 people there by name, and they always help me immediately. The program is very easy to use. It's a central part of how I teach. So I have provided a handout, which I will post to the website, that has the link for Collabra Music. You can check it out. And but this is one way to create virtual performances with your students that doesn't require a tremendous amount of time from the teacher to put together. Okay. Any questions? No? Okay, well, if you have more questions, I will provide the handout and you can get it off the website. Okay?
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it must help with virtual teaching because you can play, you can actually ask them to play along with the recording. And I mean, what I do is sometimes I will have Zoom record myself and
Mm-hmm.
I would just take that audio and I would send it to the student and I would say, now practice along with that recording.
That works.
Yeah, but however, this is a nice, I noticed that you can tweak the videos and audios, and so that's a good thing about Collabra too. But
Also,
is it
it's
$7 per student per year or per month?
per month, per month.
Oh,
So I build it into I used to charge a fee for it, but now I built it into the cost of my lessons because I make it part of a requirement that my students are regularly recording during the week because I want to see how they're practicing, you know. And I usually make it brief. Anything a student says, it's always 5 minutes or less. I set aside certain times during the week where I very quickly review things and send them feedback. So it's very useful. I consider this, my use of this, as one of the distinctive services that I'm able to provide for my students.
all right. Any questions from anyone?
Hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Great.
Jonathan, would you like to introduce our presenter, Felicia?
Yes. So we all know and love Felicia. In a few years that she's joined our group, she's made such major contributions as our webmaster, as a wonderful young teacher who is producing a wonderful stable of students. She recently was awarded her master's degree from Westchester, where she studied with Igor Rezniansky. And for today's topic, Felicia is picking a topic that I'm so glad we're covering because it is a topic that is in such need of discussion. She's going to talk about neurodiversity in teaching. I think I'm going to leave it to Felicia to give a further explanation of what that is and why it's important. So again, we're very happy to have Felicia present for us. Take it away.
Thank you. I have been taking piano lessons for 22 years, and I've been crazy the whole time. And I have also been teaching piano for maybe 7 or 8 years. I'm actually not entirely sure at this point, something like that. And over this time, I've taught a lot of students who are pretty similar to myself. And this combination of being a neurodivergent student who went on to become a teacher as well gives me a pretty interesting perspective on pedagogy. I chose the topic, I chose the title Different Trains for Different Brains for a couple of reasons, including humor. There is a bit of a harmless stereotype of autistic people being obsessed with trains, and they exist, they're out there, but they're, we can't just simplify it to that. You'll see it's so much more complicated. So this presentation is going to be a whole lot of context. Well, I should talk about myself first. So I meant to have that up earlier. Well, anyway, That was at like my second lesson. And I decided to go up to another student and point at their music because I had already begun exhibiting behaviors of copying very literally what I saw. And so I saw my teacher pointing at music and kind of did the same thing immediately. Who knew I would be doing that? How many years later? 20 years later. So I am officially diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. It's now just considered autism spectrum disorder. I've also been diagnosed with ADHD and dysthymia, which is a type of minor depression. And I'm not going to elaborate on that last point too much unless asked, don't worry about it, but it's trauma is pretty common for people who are neurodivergent from like a very early age for various reasons. Like there's on a social level, there's a lot of punishment for being weird and being sensitive if they are a sensitive type of person. I was just weird. And I wanted to say that the reason why I'm doing this talk is because my teachers have made all the difference in helping me to utilize my abilities and work around my disabilities, which is why, like, no matter the poor-ish emotional, psychological support that I had at home, I'm able to do what I do because the teachers alone can make all the difference. And I think I want to give you all understanding that can help your students who may be struggling sometimes in like subtler ways than you realize. So you're going to see like a whole lot of things in this presentation. I will share this entire presentation. I will share a handout afterwards. Like, I hope I get it out tonight. I don't know if I will. Can't promise anything, but it's going to have my list of like various symptoms from various syndromes that you can address on an individual basis as they come up, because it's always a mixture. This presentation is like mostly about autism and ADHD. And because I have those things, and I'm going to say that it's very funny how much ADHD has made this difficult to put together, but in the end, it worked. And so you're going to see some of that like present in the way that I present this. If anyone has any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat, and if I see it, I'll be happy to answer. All right. So, the brain is about 4 to 5 pounds. Did I say 5 pounds? No, 3 pounds. I don't know why I said that. 3 pounds of electrified jelly in a chemical soup. So it's amazing that it doesn't malfunction more often. Or maybe it does malfunction more often, and we just kind of sweep it under the rug for a lot of people. And so these are statistics from the CDC about the diagnosis of various disorders, illnesses, autism. In it says 1.7% of children. That is a low estimate. I'll talk more about that later, but about 9.4 of children have ADHD. 7.1% have anxiety, 3.2 have depression. And so these are like just the stats for children, and the stats are going to keep rising. That's for a variety of reasons. There's a I want to talk about the word ableism. You are all familiar with the word sexism and racism, and so this is another one of those words. It is about a discrimination against those with disabilities. It is pretty harmful, but it's very rarely intentional. It's just seeing people like a little bit less, and part of that is this subconscious reasoning called the just world fallacy, where people deserve what they get, and so therefore there's often an assumption that those who are suffering from something somehow deserve it. Like that is actually a perspective that some people have, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, and it's particularly noticeable for mental disorders because these are invisible illnesses. And it's mostly about perspectives. I thought this comic summarized it pretty well. It was funny in a pretty dark way because it demonstrates various physical ailments addressed in the way that some people address mental illnesses. Like, you have to at least make an effort, or you have to change your frame of mind, and they're missing a hand. And consider these things that people say so casually to people who are struggling with their minds. It is just another organ of the body that is malfunctioning. So I thought that this kind of conveys that pretty well. I had initially imagined that this presentation might involve more strategy talk, but on further close consideration of the strategies I actually use on my neurodivergent students, some of them are so case specific that I just decided this presentation might be better spent on talking about why certain brain things happen, give you context, give you a general sense of what to expect here and there. Things to keep in mind. I have my own strategies that I will list, and you may have to adapt with them. And they will be, it's a mixed bag. I wanted to take some time to dispel some misconceptions that people have as well about mental illness. So like starting with that comic, things like that. A lot of this talk is based around autism, also because it's like a huge cluster of connected syndromes, and a lot of those syndromes overlap with other diagnoses such as ADHD and depression and anxiety, OCD, like all of those things have some elements from autism. So it's fairly effective as a catch-all. I will be addressing everything by like symptoms rather than by like diagnosis. So sometimes causes, and I try to get a recommendation for everything. So an autism diagnosis is not easy to get. So it's extremely unlikely that there is an overdiagnosis, at least not in the modern times. There was a fluke back in the 80s or so. I'll talk about that later. But in modern times, the statistics are pretty low for a variety of reasons. It's very expensive. So not everyone could get one. And some people won't bother, for the cost, and some people just can't afford it. It can be like psychologically taxing to also go through the tests. It depends on the person. I like tests, so I breeze through it. It depends. There is a matter of sexism in the medical field, which is really interesting. There's a lot less medical research that is done on women than men in general. I don't know if you all knew this, but the symptoms of a heart attack are different in women than there are in men. So, just watch out for things like that. and there's also like an extremely common phenomenon where doctors kind of dismiss any pain a woman has as it's just stress, and then not address the problem. And it turns out they have ovarian cancer or something like that. It's also a matter of how children are socialized, the gendered socialization of children, where boys are free from responsibility a lot more, with the phrase boys will be boys, and that's just kind of like a symptom of a bigger problem. And then girls are kind of like really enforced to have not just like acceptable behavior, but normal behavior. And yeah, I went out of order there. Okay, great. So there are sometimes the lists of symptoms that say female autism and male autism, but there's a lot of overlap in symptoms. They just can kind of like outwardly show differently. Sensory problems are the same, social problems are often the same, and their style of reasoning is the same. How do I identify my neurodivergent students is a question that I got. And I'm gonna say that I personally get a gut feeling. And I think that in the end, I'm actually gonna get to that. Hang on. So autism diagnosis barriers, also racial and cultural barriers. Research has shown that Black children are disproportionately diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder when exhibiting the same symptoms as white children that would be diagnosed with autism or ADHD. And so that can ostracize them for life, basically. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, Persons of Color. And they routinely have less access to medical care, especially mental health services. They are less likely to seek treatment. They're more likely to receive low quality care, and they're more likely to end services early. This is all research. And in Asian cultures, mental health is hugely stigmatized, and seeking assistance is pretty much discouraged. Like, you should just get over it. There's a lot of that. In Asian culture. So basically the point of that section is to say that, like, for most misbehaviors, or, strange behaviors, it works out best for everyone involved if, without diagnosing them yourself, because we're not psychologists, we're not qualified to diagnose them, just give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that should be the basis of how we approach this, that a lot of students have a little bit of something that you can address in these ways, and it may work better regardless of whether they actually have a diagnosis or not, or whether they would get a diagnosis or not. So just like different ways of teaching, like, or little accommodations that I make that can make a huge difference in how a student experiences a lesson. So I'm going to talk some about the history of autism and how we can see a demonstration of environment in the autistic experience. If we consider the pre-industrial versus modern environment, quieter life in the past would have been way less overwhelming, just sensory-wise and demand-wise. Demand-wise, like social demands and work demands and financial demands. All of that, higher stress always leads to more exacerbated syndromes, and quiet, routine, extremely routine occupations were more common back then, and autistic people, by and large, would have just blended in. There's a couple theories floating around with indigo child. I mean, like some people still use the term indigo child, which is kind of funny. It's like talking about fairies, which people who have been like later identified as autistic in like stories, really old stories, were described as stolen by fairies, possessed by demons, or simply sentimental institutions to be locked away. So it's like either they would blend in or they would just be hidden away, dismissed with some other thing. And a lot of this material on the history comes from a book called Neurotribes, which is a pretty cool book. It's a really fun read. It was a fun read for me, but and so it talked about this this scientist, natural philosopher, as they had it before the word scientist came up, who was definitely autistic, like in every one of his idiosyncrasies, and was extremely brilliant and thrived because he had money. Essentially, if he did not have nobility money, he would not have been able to live the life that he did as a natural philosopher, and avoiding whoever he liked and getting away with it because he also had brilliant discoveries about things like finding new elements or measuring the weight of the earth. So he was, I say violently shy here. He hated self-promotion so much, and so his work is not extremely well known. A lot of his ideas were later would later show up in inferior forms by other scientists, and then it would be discovered that he had this idea in his notebook ages before. And he once built a second set of stairs in his house so that he would never accidentally run into the maid again. I don't think that's something a lot of us could easily afford. And that's just, that's another contextual thing, like the financial accommodation for sensory problems, for social problems. He also wore the exact same outfit for pretty much his entire adult life, and when it fell apart, he would get a new one made, exactly the same materials. So, Hans Asperger is an interesting character. The book also talked a lot about his school of little professors at the Heil Pedagogic Station in Vienna. And he created this environment that was structured, predictable, and compassionate. And it was an environment in which these children were treated as people rather than as patients, and they weren't like bound to chairs and waiting in line, but they were in play, and they were thriving in an educational environment, and their behaviors were only dictated by potential harm and not by normalcy, social acceptable behavior, which is, by the way, the opposite of ABA. I forgot to look up what ABA stands for, but ABA is a very common behavioral training suggested for autistic kids that is extremely bad, and seeks to drill out the harmless autistic behaviors of sensory regulation in favor of normal behavior. And so that's not particularly good. These are a list of other diagnoses in the past that would later be recognized as autism. And you can see how wide of a spectrum, I guess, of the different things that people thought autism looked like. And before we were able to kind of collect a compassionate sense of what it was. Autistic psychopathy and early infantile autism and schizoid personality disorder is still a thing, but it's not specifically autism. And minimal brain damage. I don't know if you guys have heard of Temple Grandin, but she was diagnosed with that, which kept her out of a mental institution. And mental institutions are sort of where, an autistic person's potential dies right there. So sometimes avoiding that is for the better. The other aspect of the history of autism has an interesting effect on how people perceive autistic people. So there is this other researcher named Leo Connor, and it's interesting how he alone had such an impact on the research of autism. He had such an obsession with his destiny to present something unique that he wouldn't admit wrong, and kind of single-handedly held back autism research by several years, by decades actually, because he did not want to acknowledge Asperger's work, and he did not want to acknowledge the fact that autism might be more common. He had a very strict, tiny definition of autism, and then only saw a handful of kids on purpose in order to fit that diagnosis. So that's on one side, the perspective of autism being extremely rare, so rare that it wasn't worth researching. And then the other side is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It was initially an extremely obscure book that listed these diagnoses, and it was also psychology was not really taken seriously as a science. It was not considered a science, if I'm not mistaken. It was a pile of observations, but not particularly unified ones. And so you can read more about this later if you're interested, but the essentially versions of autism had been showing up pretty early, but they had no idea how to describe it for a while. And then they tried to describe it more clearly in the DSM-3 in 1980, where they were trying to make it more of a science with clear, reliable results, and have create therapies that actually help people rather than couch therapy where you just talked and sometimes it would help and sometimes it wouldn't. And then it became like a popular manual, and it was in hospitals and schools and available to civilian enthusiasts in various forms. And so an explosion of awareness of autism, and then this critical error about the diagnosis, PDD-NOS. There was a really long name that stood for. Hang on. Pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which was one of the names of autism back then. He had 3 categories for social interaction, communication, and behavior. And the intent was that a person would have to have like all 3 to be diagnosed with this, but there was the critical mistake of and versus or, which kind of also shot up statistics. That has since been cleared up. A lot of those people are not counted within the statistics anymore if they only exhibited one of them. So symptoms in action, and now we talk about various ways you're actually going to see this in your students. There's a term called twice exceptional, sometimes seen as 2E. And a lot of gifted students also have difficulties and limitations that are overshadowed by their abilities. And so their needs are overlooked because people often have an oversimplified expectation of gifted students and then fail to sympathize when they run into limitations and start saying words like, you should be able to do this because you can do that. And so it's good to be warned that that sort of thing can happen, that a student is extremely gifted. They will very probably have some limitations, and to sympathize with them just as you would for anyone else. The autism spectrum disorder, spectrum is often simplified as a one-dimensional line of more or less autistic. There is a comic that came out that had a better two-dimensional circle of different aspects of autism. I personally think of it as a three-dimensional cloud. There are so many different data points of autism, so many, for example, different types of communication problems, whether it's like public speaking versus social communication versus like how you would communicate online versus how you would communicate in person, and those could all vary in different aspects. Same thing with sensory problems with visual sensitivities, auditory sensitivities, tactile sensitivities, etc. So we'll start with social and communication variations. I'll call it variations. Something about symptoms didn't sound exactly right to me, so I just went with variations because they are just brain variations. And eye contact. Let's start with the most obvious one for autism. The avoidance of eye contact is largely involuntary. And some people, when they are forced to make eye contact, are driven to distraction, anxiety. Some also experience pain. I do know a few who experience pain if they are forced to make eye contact. So they don't. Eye contact. So I wanted to say as my recommendation, recognize that eye contact is unnecessary. It's a social demand that's pretty specific to North America and a few other places, I think Europe as well. For example, in Asia, direct eye contact is a bit of a defiance. So it's not like a universal human thing, but if you need to assess their attention, what I suggest is that you ask them questions about what you said, and you will find that a lot of them are listening to you, even if they are looking the other way. It's also still perfectly fine to direct them to look at the score or their hands for clear teaching purposes. That is not the same as eye contact at all. You can still direct their eyes, but like eye contact with a person is a different matter. Clarity and literal meaning. We take things very literally. That's rhetorical questions don't exist in my teaching. And when I'm asked rhetorical questions, I do have a tendency to compulsively answer them, kind of let it slide. And just keep in mind that your questions will be answered. And perhaps that is for the best, because then you really know what's on their minds. You don't want to assume that sort of thing. Potential for misunderstandings or offense. Offense is rare, but it can happen. Figures of speech, exaggeration, misleading statements, white lies. I'm sure I had some examples of things like misleading statements or white lies that can happen in teaching. Exaggeration is not usually necessary. For example, like if you want to demand posture, it will actually affect all of your playing. It will affect fluency and ease of playing, stuff like that. You want to always be prepared to answer those things. So I try to recommend say what you mean and mean what you say as exactly as you can. And if they misinterpret something you say too literally or to a silly conclusion, don't take that personally. We just kind of go with anything is possible. So abnormal empathy levels, it's more common for autistic people to have lower empathy levels, can be the other way, lowered emotional reaction, and they are less susceptible to manipulation such as guilt tripping or accomplishing tasks for someone else's feelings. So for these individuals, building a sense of intrinsic motivation is more productive, and it will have a better effect. And it's also like easier to accomplish for those with lower empathy levels, because then they know that they are benefiting themselves rather than doing it for the pleasure of other people. They are less likely to understand or feel musical expressions based on what others feel that they are conveying. I'll say that I definitely am on that side of things. I have a lot of people tell me that I play very expressively, but when I'm doing that, I actually am calculating on a moment-to-moment basis things like rubato, dynamics, meter. All of that is calculated to like the moments I had before, the harmony, the overall structure of the piece, the style, of course. So it's extremely measured out, and it's not, that's something that can be taught. So just be aware that if you're telling a student to just feel it, that may not always be very effective. If they produce no results as a result of you telling them to just feel it, you should probably give them more concrete ways of doing the expressions that you are thinking of. And it's fine if they cannot create their own expressions or feelings for a piece. It's totally fine to have them just imitate what you think that piece should be expressed as, because that's how we end up learning that, this type of music will be best received with this type of expression and things like that. The other part here, they can be highly enthusiastic about other aspects of the music. They might, other aspects of the music that are not like the normal feelings for people, that people feel things from music. But I was really interested in the construction of music, being immersed in music theory classes for the first time, actually kind of like made everything click. And I'm like, oh, music is a science. And then I started to like music, which is an interesting way to go about it. So music can still be a wonderful, joyous thing. It just won't be in the way that you might normally perceive it to be. Heightened empathy levels can be seen with higher emotional sensitivity and volatility. So it's also possible with autism, slightly less common, but it's definitely there. And they're extremely sensitive to your emotional state. So it's important to remain calm despite all frustrations. And even if they're getting highly emotional, if you remain calm, you can create an equilibrium. Like they can balance out, they'll just need a moment. And there's a thing that a lot of these syndromes experience called rejection sensitive dysphoria. So you see I listed autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, there's more, which is where they actually suffer pain from the feeling of being rejected or hurt. And they often have extremely low self-esteem. There's a lot of worst case scenario thinking. So they will tend to avoid situations with possible failure of others' expectations. So it's mostly about how others see them. It's mostly about the expectations. I would recommend that it's good to exercise reframing failure as stepping stones towards progress, and to try to emphasize that how other people do not perceive failures as like you're a horrible person. I don't think you've ever seen someone make a mistake and say, wow, they must be terrible people. But it is how they feel about it. And so it helps to kind of address that directly sometimes if they seem to have an extreme fear of failure. That other people are not worried about it, and most mistakes are easily forgotten. Oh, there was a little example someone brought up. I've heard once explain that, like, do you remember the last time someone else got embarrassed versus the last time you got embarrassed? You would never remember the embarrassment of someone else, and even if you remember your own. That kind of thing, that kind of explanation can help. Mutism is interesting. So I should explain that mutism is when they completely stop talking, or maybe they have never spoken. That happens. Rather common to varying degrees for autistic people. Mostly seen in kids just having delayed speech. I think I did not speak until I was 4, and then ever since then I couldn't stop. So it's sometimes it just goes away like that, and sometimes they never develop speech. Sometimes it's selective, and at varying levels, language can be an overwhelming task to accomplish, from reaction to thought, through social filters, through linguistic rules to speech. So there's a lot of layers there that can kind of have a complete breakdown, and then they can't talk. So I recommend that you try to have methods of nonverbal responses for muted students, whether it's pointing at options or demonstrating. And I got that idea from the fact that a lot of autistic people who have learned sign language have been able to communicate a lot better through sign language than they can through speech. Especially if they are mute, they can still communicate through sign language, or they can even type responses. They can write responses. It's just the talking might be a block. It depends on where the breakdown is in the communication, but those are some options to consider. Masking, this is a very funny meme. It's a meme about masking. And this is autist is another word for autistic people. This is how I learned some social skills. I did learn a decent amount of social skills from Star Trek. And there's various ways that someone could go about learning social skills and just copying them, not necessarily understanding them, but it's exactly like this. This is the test that everyone is given, and so we have to kind of figure it out that way. So there's a lot of autistic people, I think I may be included in this category, who don't always appear autistic, but we've learned to mask, and it is an intense, deliberate effort to act neurotypical, to disguise autistic behaviors. And girls are more likely to learn how to mask because of the aforementioned socializations, gendered socialization. And it's often the reason why girls are less likely to get diagnosed. Sometimes someone said sometimes you need to ask the parents. Not sure why they don't share that at the beginning. Sometimes. The way I see it, sometimes you can just address the symptoms as they come up and assume the best, benefit of the doubt sort of thing at all times, regardless of diagnosis or not. A lot of parents also tend to deny that their kids have any problems at all. That is extremely common, like I said, in Asian families in particular. So recommendations, you don't seem autistic, not necessarily helpful, not necessarily productive. You know, that would be on purpose if it's true. And if an autistic student like seems to become more autistic, seems to be masking less, they are trusting you, and I think that's just good to know. And if they are interested in learning how to mask, I would advise acting classes or drama club. Actually, all of most autistic people I know who learn to mask would say that acting it's all just acting. We are learning scripts all the time. I know that when I talk to people all the time, I have like algorithms. I take what a person is saying and I calculate what is the right response to this thing that they said. What is the socially acceptable response to this situation? And I kind of run it through how well do I know this person? What is my personal history with this person, etc. And all of that you can learn from acting, especially with like creating expressions. Sensory and physical variation. So a lot of these things are environmental, and there are certain things under your control you can help them with. If you accommodate these things, they will focus more comfortably. And so that's what this section is going to be about. Sensory overload can lead to notable distraction or complete shutdown, meltdown. So filters for senses can be poor, leading to sensitivity to loud noises, specific timbres, bright lights, specific colors, strong smells. So for example, I have pretty strong sensitivities to dogs barking, and I have a little bit of a sensitivity to bright light. So I actually am a whole lot less stressed if the lights are a little dim. I remember lessons with Igor. I figured out several years in that if he only had one of the two sets of lights on, I would be way less stressed for the whole lesson. And so sometimes that bit of difference can help. A lot of us can hear electricity. It's just a fun fact. Fluorescent lights in particular can be very distracting from a sound perspective. Also, we can hear things like a TV being on even though the screen is blank, and so sensory underload is the opposite thing, where it's usually just distracting or distressing, but there is just a need to feel. And some can be soothed with pressure, such as weighted blankets, tight hugs, squeezing grips. And so I do remember having at least a couple of autistic people. Obviously, this can only be done by you in person as far as an online lesson is concerned. If a parent is highly involved, which usually these students, they are highly involved, they can help with that, giving them a squeeze. Oh, right, the recommendations are on the next page. Autistic people, there's a lot of us who also have an extremely high pain tolerance, and so sometimes we'll do things that worry people. I think I once kind of dropped my head to a desk with kind of just like the comical intent of exhibiting frustration, and there was just like dead silence. There's a little gasp and dead silence because they were worried that I hit myself, but I felt almost nothing. So this is pretty tough. And some autistic people are more obvious about this. They'll be biting themselves, hitting themselves, throwing themselves against a wall. You may have seen these behaviors. If they are not actually at risk of causing injury, I'm about to say that, you know, do try to watch out if they're actually going to hurt themselves in, like, you know, breaking skin or breaking bone, etc. But like, if it's just kind of like a dull impact, you can kind of tolerate it. I mean, as far as biting is concerned, we now are in a germ concern, so we can't have that. But oh, I should mention that under stims later. So you can ask the child or parent for particular sensitivities, because often they know. I mean, hopefully they know. Avoiding loud noises in general is a good thing, but particularly for these students, because I do have a couple of neurotypical students, totally normal students, and they'll have babies crying in the background and dogs barking in the background, and I will be more distracted than the student. So sometimes normal kids can kind of filter that out, but if they have a bit of sensitivity, of course, if that can be toned down, that would be great. Avoiding bright lights, of course, it depends if they need it to see, but sometimes the student will find it easier to focus. Like I mentioned, I was definitely in that category. Avoiding strong smells, that's not something that we have to be concerned with right now. But when it comes to in-person lessons, there's a lot of us with sensitivities to perfumes and air fresheners. Right, need for pressure. So I listed here, with parental permission, hugs are an option. Later, in person, when it's safe. But like I mentioned, I did have a student who would respond better if they had some like arm squeezing. Then they were able to kind of get certain sensory needs out and then focus on what they were doing. Stimming. Obviously based on the word stimulation. So I don't know if you've ever seen these things. It's called a fidget cube. It's like I guess it's got the same idea as a fidget spinner, but it just has so much more going on. And I love this thing. There's so many buttons. There's like a spinny bit here, and there's a switch. I understand that a lot of people in place of this would click pens. It's along the same idea, just sort of in a more fun package with a lot of rolly bits and a little joystick here. So these sorts of stims for autism and ADHD, they actually have slightly different like outputs, but they both help. And other examples of stims are nail biting. Echolalia is when they kind of just repeat what they just heard, or they repeat a word a lot because they like the sound of it or they like the feel of it in the way that they say it. Leg shaking, body rocking. So fidget toys are not just like hand things. Sometimes there are also there's this website called stimtastic.co. When you get the PowerPoint, you can click on that. And they also have things like chew toys, which is good for if they need to be chewing something. It's better than eating all the time. I think like it's good for just getting energy out that way, especially anxious energy. And these are behaviors that help us to regulate stress and tension. I mean, especially for autism, regulate stress and tension by activating controlled sensory input. Having something in our senses under our control is really the key. This also sometimes can be used to ease pain, having alternative sensory input. So allow it when possible, allow non-harmful, non-invasive stimming where possible. Allow fidget toys while not playing music if they have them, you know. You can always, like I mentioned before, test how much they're paying attention as a result of these fidget toys by asking them questions. And for things like compulsive skin picking, nail biting, those habits can be harmful and unhealthy. So you can recommend, they have these bitter nail polishes that are specifically made to prevent nail biting. They, I find, I do have a skin picking problem, and I do find that bandages are super helpful for like keeping that under control. So that's a suggestion you can make, or just keep bandages on hand. Backwards. Perspective variations. How we see things. Starting with our method of reasoning and problem solving. I will say that why? I mean, I know that every kid asks that, but I find that as a person with ADHD and autism and knowing others, we really need an answer to why for everything when we ask it. So always be willing to answer the question of why, especially for your instructions, even if you think they might not understand, because not having a reason will create more unnecessary resistance. Having a reason, like as long as they understand that you have a reason, even if they don't entirely understand the reason, that helps a ton with just kind of accepting whatever instruction you have. So because I said so, has never worked. Fluency with patterns. We'll say that autistic people in particular have a specific knack for patterns. And this is extremely advantageous for music once they learn how to recognize them. So pattern pieces are relatively easy assignments. If you want to challenge such a student, you pick something a little bit more randomized. But these students also tend to take to music theory like duck to water. So preferences for familiarity is definitely an autistic thing. Repetitive tendencies, like I mentioned, oh, sorry, forgot to answer. What is allistic? The word allistic means non-autistic, and I should put it in there somewhere. And it very specifically talks about like non-autistic, so it can include someone with like other syndromes, but just not autism. So repetitive tendencies, I mentioned a thing called echolalia, where we say a word or a sound a bunch. I once got an echolalia for a really ridiculous word. It was, it's not like a real word. I'll actually type it into chat. There's it's a nonsense word, but I just found it so amusing that I couldn't stop saying it for a while. And sometimes it's a noise like that. It's just a silly excessive contraction of several words. Sometimes their echolalia will be something you said, and we'll just kind of say it back, not mockingly, just sometimes it helps us process what you said. Sometimes we're we just need to say something, but we don't know what to say. So that can happen. So special interests, later on I'll talk about ADHD hyperfocus, but special interests are a long-term obsession with a particular subject, usually consuming all related information. It's obsession is the best word, and it goes way beyond a hobby. It's definitely a compulsive thing. But it's super useful. So we don't like surprises. I will say that just avoid surprises, or at least give us details. Change of plans, that's kind of relatively well known, but try not to change plans. If you do, I find that if you give good reasons for the changing of plans, that alleviates a whole lot of the stress that changing plans can come with. If a student would like to play a piece they love week after week, it's worth the bit of time spent. So I do find that a lot of them have will get a piece that they'll kind of get stuck on for several months of just needing to play through it, whether you want it or not. And, you know, if you let them, it doesn't cost that much time, depending on the length of the piece, but proportional to their lesson. And if you can find out a student's special interest, incorporating it into their lessons can be a source of enthusiastic work, joy, creativity. I do know students for whom I assign them something relative to their special interest, and they would go above and beyond with their practice as a result, because they were interested in that thing, which was coincidentally trains. So I wanted to talk also a little bit about functioning labels and ableism. I did talk about Asperger's good work. but I will say that it is no longer used in the latest edition of the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, and it just all of these things fall under the category of autism spectrum disorder. A lot of people in the autistic community are also no longer using the term because he was kind of a passive Nazi collaborator. And so that does complicate things. And the fact that a lot of people who have been diagnosed with Asperger's use it to consciously or subconsciously label themselves as better than other autistic people. So that's not necessarily a healthy thing to, perpetuate. We're also no longer using the terms high and low functioning, and I would advise no longer using these terms because, like I mentioned, the spectrum is not high and low functioning, left and right. It's so many different aspects, and in the end, a lot of the measure of someone's higher or lower functioning is entirely based on their ability to communicate. But so a lot of times an autistic person who cannot communicate but has extraordinary abilities in math or music or literature, but cannot speak, will be labeled as low functioning. And therefore it's an oversimplification that can be harmful. I just wanted to throw that in there specifically because I just talked about all of the different variances that can happen. And that it truly can't be a straight line. Comorbidities. This is a word I read a lot and don't say out loud a lot. There's a lot of overlap with ADHD. So I am going to talk a little bit about that, especially because you'll also find ADHD is more common. I think a lot of you will agree that you are finding more students are coming in with ADHD-like behaviors, and so it's good to be prepared for that. There's this fantastic book for us called You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Crazy, or Stupid? And same thing is occurring with the matter of sexism, that girls are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD because they are being more socially controlled. But some don't even get a diagnosis until adulthood, or don't even consider the possibility until adulthood. This book, I just pulled this straight from the book because it's a great summary. It's more accurate to describe attentional problems as components of the process of attention. This process includes choosing the right thing to focus on, sustaining the focus over time, dividing the focus between relevant stimuli, and shifting focus to another stimulus. So impaired function can occur in any or all of these areas, which leads to failing to pay attention, and it becomes easier to understand the diversities of how differently ADHD can present. We kind of use ADHD and ADD interchangeably. I think now ADD is under the category of ADHD, and ADHD now has 3 types. Primarily inattentive, primarily hyperactive, and combined type, I believe. So poor distraction filter due to an underdeveloped midbrain, oh, that's not from the book, but it's still relevant, can lead to a constant barrage of information from all 5 senses even if they know what they should be focusing on, there's all this other stuff. And so therefore focus can be hard sometimes. So if you can try to reduce the other stuff, that can help. Hyperfocus is sort of the opposite of this. It happens often enough. It is a thing that happens where we then find something to put all of the focus on, and the outside world no longer exists. Sometimes we forget we exist. That happens. It's also been observed for many people with ADHD to later develop bipolar syndrome as they grow up. Not always, but there is a common enough pattern. So recommendations in general for a student that seems to have ADHD symptoms: allow stimming. It is an energy release rather than a stress relief in this case. And releasing that energy helps them to focus in the present moment because it helps them to filter some stuff. Allowing breaks. So if they're the hyperactive type, the physically hyperactive type, giving them a short break to literally get up and run around and then come back can help so much. And those numbers of seconds is a small cost in making a lesson more bearable for both of you, really. Otherwise, you'll both be frustrated. This part just reminded me that I am extremely dehydrated, and that is also a thing that happens. We tend to forget to hydrate or just fail to feel thirsty. So sometimes lack of focus can be that. I do have at least 2 students, if prompted to drink water, will be a more focused student for the rest of the lesson. So try not to have huge swathes of information and then ask them questions, because I guarantee they lost some of that already. But try to ask questions as you go along while you're explaining a thing, a little question to prompt some thinking, and then a bit more information, more questions. Understand that zoning out may happen frequently and involuntarily, and being patient with that, I guess, even if it can be frustrating. Minimizing distracting sounds, lights, smells, as mentioned earlier. One thing that I forgot to mention on here as a practice strategy, specifically because of my ADHD, I got this amazing app called Chrono List. Spelled like chronological, so just Chrono List. And any interval timer will work, because this is Android only, I'm pretty sure. And for practice, I find that doing drills in short bursts and then being forced to switch tasks after something like, okay, let me try to explain this in order. I have timers for 10 minutes. It will ring every 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, depending on how I'm feeling that day. And when that timer goes off, I switch to a different piece of music entirely. So that gives me this many minutes to get something done in this piece of music or in this section of the music, and then forcing myself to switch off to another thing, I find extremely helpful for practicing, for like being efficient in my practice, because if I stick on one thing for too long, I can neglect the other things, or I just kind of sometimes end up sitting there distracted doing something else because I'm not bound to time. So that's a method. It's a little crazy, but it's like competing with the ADHD. Like, okay, you want to focus on something else, I'm going to focus on something else, and then it kind of gets you back on track, which is a fun way to do things. What would you do when they start zoning out is an excellent question. Sometimes I give them a moment, like I'll earth to, blank. That is a fantastic way to do it. It depends on how I'm feeling that day, admittedly, but I will sometimes just kind of go quiet, and then they'll realize I've been quiet, and then they'll look at me again. That can be just as effective as saying anything else. I have sometimes asked a student, did you zone out? And I try to make obvious that they are free to say that they did. And I'm like, okay, I will restart from this point, or and just kind of restate what I did, because then after that they tend to check back in, and that's a perfectly fine way to go about it. I think that just tolerating that it might happen, and if you really think about it, if it's for seconds at a time, it's not that big of a deal. I think that can also just help you as a teacher and your stress about it when there are moments of zoning out, wasted time. I don't, and I say that as a person who, like, I do tend to hold myself to like the pressure that I am doing something productive at every minute of every lesson, but I have been able to kind of let go of bits of time for the sake of not stressing out about it, because it's truly not worth it. Comorbidities. There's more. A couple of other like little syndromes that kind of appear in and out of different things. So executive dysfunction is a fun one, and by that I mean an extremely not fun one. It's a block from being able to do something. The best way to describe it is getting stuck. I will often want to do something, and I will sit there kind of internally screaming at myself, you need to get up and do this. Please just get up and do this. Let's go. We got to do this. And it's not a pleasant experience at all. So this happens. This is not laziness. Just so you know, like, that's important to recognize that sometimes they may be stuck. And I don't think this happens necessarily in lessons, but this definitely happens for practice. I have more than a few occasions sat at the couch next to the piano, stuck on the couch, looking at the piano and screaming at myself internally for long swathes of time to just get up and go practice, but I can't kind of get myself to move. And so the key difference from laziness is the fact that the student is aware of it, does not like it, wants to do it, but can't. Helping them to be aware that it's a thing that happens, sometimes that by itself can alleviate some of those moments of getting up and doing things, because then they know, oh, it's just that. And sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. Humor and hyperbole can help. Someone mentioned earlier, earth to blank, that's a good way to break that sometimes. And being aware that it happens also can help you on your part to sympathize with the fact that we are not getting stuck on purpose. I guess that's important for you to know. Auditory processing disorder. This is actually a fun one. I mean, like sometimes, unless we're being given important instructions, then it's not a fun one. But I'm going to share a bit of this video. And if you haven't already seen it, it is a song by an Italian artist. It is very cheesy 80s, 90s pop. And I'll let you just experience it first.
Freezing cold in Nancy 9 shoes old.
You the cold maze say I'm freezing cold in Nancy 9 shoes old. All right.
When I stay in the shoes now, I'll hold the scene in a whole red map against the color boss time.
And I want you to try to hear words, basically.
When I stay in the shoes now, I'll hold the scene in a whole red map against the color boss time. When it's the same age, you can't be seen. You know, for someone, never just a god, play with this jam.
So, if you can't hear words, I can't identify any words, it's because there aren't any. It was composed with lyrics that are entirely sounds that sound like English, but are not actually English. And so that's a lot of fun. Unless, like I said, you're being given important instructions. And so this is sometimes what auditory processing disorder sounds like. Sometimes that's what they hear and then nothing else happens. Sometimes that's what they hear and then it takes a little while for them to process that noise into words. And I can't tell you how many times someone has told me something and I said, huh? And then before they finish repeating, I say, oh yeah, yeah. Because I realized what they said. And my recommendation is speaking more slowly without annoyance can help in general, and also brush it off if they interrupt your repeating, because sometimes that delayed processing is what happens if you're repeating yourself and then they kind of go, oh, that, and then respond. I forgot to mention in here in this presentation that interruption is also extremely common for people with ADHD. Like they will just interrupt you. It's not a disrespecting, it's again a compulsive thing. I am learning to catch myself doing it a little bit more, but that's a slow going process. I will just barge into a conversation and not realize it until I finish talking. Or at least until after I've already disrupted the conversation. So that's, this is dyslexia. I think most of you have heard of dyslexia. Dyscalculia is an interesting related thing where not words are mixed up, but numbers are mixed up. And so they may find that they have difficulty with math. There are different ways dyslexia can show up. So sometimes it's missing letters, sometimes it's mixed up letters, all the words are crunched together, sometimes it's doubled, sometimes it's blurry. And there, my recommendations for that can help. Sometimes it's hit or miss, but some of these things happen, or some of these things work. There are lots of big note scores available out there. There's sometimes just having bigger helps. Apparently, for a good number of dyslexic students, having a colored overlay on whatever they're reading can help improve their speed of reading and comprehension. So you can find those online to buy. And sometimes it's actually mixed up with the possibility that they need glasses. So a couple of students have discovered that they needed glasses from piano lessons because they truly just couldn't see the music. But they can get by with like reading on books because they just hold it closer, or reading on a screen, they just sit closer. A couple of other miscellaneous things. Synesthesia is actually a fun one. It is more common with autism. Synesthesia is when senses are mixed up. And so there are people who can taste colors, and they see sounds, and they hear colors, things like that. And so you can use that to their advantage with associative memorization and creativity. OCD and anxiety. I am not going to claim that I am an expert on these things, OCD, anxiety, depression, but I do want to like try to talk about them a little bit. OCD in particular, it's useful to explain to them that there is like a full connection between things in music theory, and allow generous opportunities for definite success, because failure can be way too anxiety inducing. We are almost done. This is like second last. Depression. Some people think that is just a sadness, but it's a chemical imbalance which leads to feeling. It's like I find it more commonly emptiness than sadness, exhaustion, self-hatred. I mean, a whole variety of other things that then lead to like physical ailments. So just understand and expect frequent tiredness. Be considerate in general, I think, is a huge portion of this presentation. Believe students benefit of the doubt. That's the most important thing on the slide, but I will say don't support Autism Speaks and don't support ABA for a whole variety of reasons. I can elaborate on that later, but yes, here we go. Thank you.
This was an extremely informative presentation on a subject that really needs a lot of attention. I'd just like to open this up. I'm sure a lot of us have questions for Felicia.
Yes, happy to answer.
I want to open that up. So if you physically raise your hand, maybe Felicia can call on those people. If no one has questions, I have plenty, but I'd rather let other people do it first. Okay, I'll start with a question.
Sure.
I'm sure this is something that all of us can relate to. Let me start with one. I teach both adults. I teach young children all the way up to adults.
Mm-hmm.
A common thing I see in all age groups is the student gets into a mental loop where they just can't compute what's in front of them. So for example, they're sight reading and they all of a sudden start playing things that have absolutely no relation to what's on the page. Or they seem to get tripped up on something that should be simple for them but just becomes unmanageable.
Yes.
There are certain students that I find this happens with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple adults that I suspect this may be a symptom of aging, but there are also some kids who I think who sometimes have ability being able to pay attention in the ways that I would consider conventional. So that's my limitation, I suppose. But what strategies do you have for helping a student when they seem to be in some kind of a mental loop that they can't get out of?
You can't always break it within that piece of music or
Okay.
within that particular activity. And so what you have to do is break from the activity and like if it's not at the end of the lesson and come back to it. Well, even if it's at the end of the lesson, you can just come back to it next time, no bother. Various ways. Sometimes they need to stand up and stretch. I think that alone, especially, I would say, I really should talk about this a little bit. Arms up, we don't do enough, and shoulders like back, because we spend so much of our time with our shoulders forward at the computer, at the piano. And so pulling the shoulders backwards and then just a little bit of movement. Get the blood flowing. Sometimes that can help the mind.
Yeah. I had an Alexander technique who would suggest if students are having problems with things that you can actually have them crawl on the floor. And I actually used to do this until one day one of my fellow students caught me doing it in a practice room, and I was very embarrassed.
Oh, no. That's an interesting, I don't remember whether we went over that in Alexander technique. I'm going to admit, I did take 2 semesters of Alexander technique and remember almost nothing, but I do know that it probably had a permanent, like it gave me a permanent ability to voluntarily relax everything. So that's super helpful. But yeah, getting up to stretch can help. Hydrating can help. As I mentioned, the brain needs water. And I don't think we drink enough of it. And sometimes you just have to close the whole thing and do something else. And I think, because breaking it within the activity is, I don't even know whether that's possible.
Okay.
I think I've tried to do that, and I really there's a lot of times where I definitely should have just stopped, let it go, do something else. We can go back to it.
Right. Another thing I would find that I don't know if this relates to what challenges this relates to, but there are certain types of sight reading patterns that tend to trip some of these students up, like neighbor note patterns where you have a note, it skips or jumps away and comes back to the same note or chord. I find that these same students that I'm thinking of mine, who have these kind of mental loop syndromes, they often get stymied on things like that. I've tried to experiment and see if they see that the note is moving or something. I've never really gotten anywhere with that. Is anyone else experience something like this? Like you have a pattern where, maybe they play one note, the passage steps away and then comes back to the same note, and the student is just unable to see that the first and the last note or chord are actually the same.
I'm glad that you asked that, because I just created a new solution in my mind. So you work with digital music a lot, right?
What do you mean?
I mean, PDFs, and I mean, like, do they read music from PDFs that you send them?
No, they have their books in front of them. I mean, I will share my screen when necessary, but they're using their repertoire books and their method books, or if I gave them any handouts, I still use paper documents, but I'll share my screen when necessary.
See you, Carol. So one idea I had, which if they're reading from PDF, which I don't do to my students either, but or if they're reading from a screen share, oh wait, you could demonstrate through a screen share and highlight each space with different colors.
Okay.
Maybe that can visually lock into them. Oh yeah, that's the same place. That's one way to do it. And I think alternatively, if they are working on if they're working on like a copied piece of music, like they can just copy their music and have them maybe color across the staff
Okay.
on a spare copy to see the shared lines and spaces. I feel like I've encountered that problem myself, but I don't always come up with the solution right away. So there you go, a brand new,
Okay.
fresh solution.
That's good. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I do love questions.
It's not a question as much as just a comment. Sorry, my video's not on because I'm chasing 3 kids. I'm Liz. I met Felicia through streaming. We're both performing musicians on Twitch, and I teach classroom music. So I teach many kids, many on the spectrum, many not. And I just really benefited from your presentation, thinking about as I enter the fall, both with virtual and with in-person learning. And I just want to say thank you so much for that.
I am so glad I could help. So glad you could be here. There's my friend from Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. I hope you're in Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm sorry you can't. Thank you. You all are very lucky to have Felicia in your community.
Agreed.
Thank you for being with us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Felicia, I totally agree. I'm really so glad to be aware of everything that you presented today. I think I was aware of some of it, but not all of it. And this really, helps me to see things from a different perspective as a music teacher, whether or not the parents tell me that students have a measure of autism. There's still, maybe they don't even know if their kids do, but I see some of these things in the kids, and I even put in the chat, I wonder if it's more than just 1.7% of kids.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I might have forgotten to actually like speak that connection, but yes, there's that statistic, and then there's the fact that it's so hard to get diagnosed, and so even more, definitely more common than that at varying levels, even with just a little bit on the spectrum, as it were. Sometimes little accommodations can help.
I find this fascinating. So
yeah,
thank you so much.
I'm so glad I could help and present new information.
Questions?
Felicia, agree, great topic and very informative. And, I think that, it's great to have this understanding as a teacher and as a human being, across other people, other activities. It's really great information to have. And it's also, I think everybody has some maybe small, like I was thinking of myself and my shortcomings a lot of times when you were talking about these things, like the executive dysfunction, how I'm trying to move and I see the stuff I need to pack in the boxes and I want to pack it, but I don't. Like,
yeah.
And it's a small thing, but it just helps to have a really broad understanding of these challenges. And, as human beings, I think we all have some, maybe small level of those challenges. And I think as I'm aging, it's getting, it's magnified. My anxiety is bigger and those things, just for me personally.
Totally understand. And I think I actually was able to help quite a few friends with like introducing them to the words executive dysfunction, that there is a word for that thing they're experiencing where they want to do something but they can't, and they really want to be productive but they can't. So understanding that it's an actual thing helps so much with not feeling so horribly guilty about it, at least, if nothing else. Because that kind of thing can lead to a lot of guilt. And a lot of these things can lead to guilt if they don't have an awareness that other people experience it too.
Yeah.
So Felicia, we'll be sending your handout out. I guess it's a slideshow, actually.
Well, I'll send the slideshow, and then I'll have a document with the like just kind of the symptoms and things by itself if you want like a document for just that.
That would be great.
Fantastic,
And
yeah.
I'll be, so everyone can expect an email in just a couple days of, a follow-up email about this meeting. So you'll get the recording, you'll get the handouts access, and the slide presentation access.
Thank you. Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm glad that everything I said made sense. Sometimes I have this web in my head and I jump too many points over, but thank you.
Yeah, and I think it was important to have this topic addressed to us as music teachers, because I think it's perhaps not talked about enough among colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, there, which is understandable due to the whole stigma. I think Carol mentioned earlier during my presentation, a whole era of stigma against this, and how much of a brand new field of research this is, really, relatively.
I also found when I taught in public school system, the guidance, we were being held very accountable for trying to address the needs of all of our students, but I found myself, very rarely did I kind of get the guidance that I could have used to try to help me with students who needed my attention in some way. And I found out that the only way I was able to do it was to communicate with the parents directly and to communicate with the students directly, and just have to handle each one differently. But it was hard to kind of develop a list of best practices I found in my 10 years in the classroom.
Yeah.
And the politics around giving support for students who need it has gotten so out of hand. And I've also found that there was a gender component and a racial component to who got the services, and it was so blatant.
Yeah, exactly.
It was so blatant. There were certain kids who would get the help and others who wouldn't. The ones who had the right advocacy got it, and the ones who didn't.
Yep.
And it was so frustrating to me. And you also mentioned, when talking about neurodivergent students, I had students who would do fine academically, but clearly they needed support in other ways. And I would a constant refrain I would get from my administration is, well, we can't get involved because they get good grades.
Exactly, and that's where the
And I'm
twice
like, I don't care about the
comes
student's
in.
grade. I care about the student. So this is, I can't tell you how glad I was when you proposed this topic, because I feel many of us as teachers need a lot of help in this area, and I think you gave us a lot of help today.
I am happy to help. Jean,
Yeah.
you have a question?
Yeah, or I guess not such a specific question, but I'm just sort of I'm floored by the fact that particularly ADHD is so common, but yet we have colleagues that don't teach students with ADHD or refer them. Or it's not. Somehow I feel like it's not enough mainstream, that it's somehow it's all right to say, well, I just I don't know enough about it to do that, instead of being accepted that we all need to do it. It's a common condition, and we all need to do it.
It's going to become increasingly common, and I will say that they take a different energy. Students with ADHD, I have several students with ADHD with wildly different manifestations, and so the most physically hyperactive student I have is an interesting force to be reckoned with, really. He is very brilliant, and he also breaks down very easily at failure. And so That's another little demonstration of twice exceptional. That so like I said, it takes a different energy, it takes a different patience, and it would be good if all teachers could learn this patience. But I think sometimes I don't think we can even expect every teacher to develop that patience, but those who can really should.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, great. Well, listen, this was great. I hope we can continue the dialogue about this important topic.
Yeah, happy to answer any further questions.
Yeah.
I'm always accessible. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I don't always respond. I do try.
That's
You had randomly reminded me that I'm supposed to be putting up the list of duets from the prime time.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yes.
That'll be
Right.
great. All right.
And fixing the web page for our
Ellen
math
Chow.
class. Yeah.
Yes.
Ellen Chow. Yeah.
Can you? Oh, so a brilliant thing I discovered. You can schedule emails in Gmail. That's the first thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I actually also got a texting app that it's called Pulse SMS. Unfortunately, it is Android only, but Pulse SMS, it was worth all $11 because I can schedule texts. There's so many times when I realize I need to text a parent and it's 3 a.m. and I'm looking at my phone.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's one of the ways that I think I forgot to mention. That's a phrase I'm going to use a whole lot. Sorry. It's a complicated subject. If you need a student to schedule something and they have a history of forgetting to schedule the thing, I do know that I have a serious problem with forgetting to put things in my calendar, and then I have no idea what I was supposed to do. This is happening now. With a student, you can sit there and tell them, just add it to your calendar right now. Just if they have a phone, and to do it by themselves, just do it right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth the extra 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Agreed. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Very,
Great
very
tip.
much, Felicia. And also, if you want to stay for our program committee meeting,
It will be brief.
yeah,
will
it can
be
be
brief.
brief. And even if you're not in the committee and you're considering being in the committee or just want to see how we plan things for
Or give us an
our
idea
members.
for a presentation or presenter or topic that you'd like to see covered.
Right, give us ideas.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be great if you could stay.
We'll be brief. We all have busy days, me included, so I don't have unlimited time. I'd like to see if we can do this in maybe 15 minutes or less.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I'll turn off the recording.